All right, everyone, welcome back to Nonprofit Enthusiast Live. I am so excited to be here with you all once again. So before we get started, actually, hold on one second. It looks like the live has paused. Hold on a second. I, I just want to make sure if you can hear me, just give me a thumbs up. I think we're good. Okay, perfect. All right, before we get started, once again, I'm your host, Lashina Williams, and I'm excited to be here with you all today. If you have any questions throughout, we're going to be talking about community building. So, our topics last week, we ended with fund development and fundraising. So, if you missed that, make sure that you go and check that out in our guide section. And this month's topic is community building. And we have a very special guest back on with us. We have Dana Litwin with us, and we're going to dive into this conversation. But before we do that, I just want to remind you, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box. Don't forget to tag any friends that you know should be involved in the conversation. Tag them in the chat box. And also, if you're catching us on replay, give us a hashtag replay in the chat. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm so excited to have Dana here with us today. So, hey, Dana, welcome. Thank you for joining us again.
Hi, Lashina. It's my pleasure to be back on the show. I'm excited to talk with you and see what questions folks have about community building today.
Yes, and I remember the last time you were on when we were talking about volunteer and all the wonderful tips you have given and resources you have given us. So I'm excited about this conversation about community building. But before we do that, do you mind, for those that have not had the opportunity to get to know you, telling them a little bit about yourself, how you entered the nonprofit arena, and just giving us some history on how you started your journey in nonprofit?
Yeah, well, I was raised to be a musician, but I'm non-practicing. So I actually I was playing trumpet professionally, I was singing, and I had been a volunteer since childhood, really, like beach cleanups and conservation and animal shelters. And in my 20s, I had the opportunity to take over a job of a friend as an entry level volunteer coordinator at Project Open Hand. So that was kind of like, very early 2000s, I think, like 2002-ish or so. And I really just loved it because it combined my creativity. I'm a people person. I'm used to public speaking and being on stage. I had done some acting and some comedy, but my jobby jobs before then had been a mix of project management and kind of very analytical administrative things, which I also love diving into. So
Mhm.
kind of volunteer engagement, community building, nonprofit work just really seemed to finally mesh all of my interests and abilities and knowledge together. So 20 or something years later, I'm now a full-time consultant, but I had those couple of decades with Project Open Hand, San Francisco Zoo, Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, and then my clients have been from all kinds of sectors around the world since I've been consulting. And I got my CVA, if people aren't familiar with that,
Mhm.
Certified in Volunteer Administration in 2014, and that renews every 5 years or so. And that's the only global certification that shows expertise in volunteer engagement and administration. So it's not a class you take, it's more like someone taking a doctor taking the medical boards. It kind of tests
Mhm.
your lifelong knowledge and your judgment and your ethics. And if you get a CVA after your name, which I have, although I didn't put it into my name today, then that means that you know what you're talking about with community building and volunteer engagement. And I do still do some music and stuff. I just don't rely on it full time because that was stressful.
Mhm.
Stressful.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm excited. So we had the right person on today, especially to kick off the conversation of community building.
I think so. I mean, that's such a crucial piece. And one of the questions I get asked probably the most about volunteer engagement or community building or community engagement is how do I recruit more volunteers, more donors? How do we get advocates and supporters and other kinds of ambassadors to align with our mission and get excited about it. And all of that boils down to creating relationships. So community building is listening and relationship building, and it's a long-term investment. There's always I have a YouTube channel, as you know, called Priceless Advice with Leaders and Volunteers, and every week I put out a little short 5 or 10 minute video called Tuesday Tips, and we'll point folks towards that channel.
Mhm,
But I constantly emphasize that you have your long-term relationship and community building goals, and you have your immediate, well, what's a short-term effect if we need 50 people in 2 weeks to do a creek cleanup, or we suddenly
mhm,
need 5 shifts filled at the food bank, or the our usual donors dropped off. How do we reach out to new audiences? And all of that has to do with talking with people and having a very authentic and sincere conversation, and what are called listening sessions. And that's a
mhm,
specific event, as I'm sure you know, and many in your audience know,
mhm,
where you're going to hear stuff from your community or a potential new audience, and it's a conversation with them instead of talking at people. And what I've
mhm,
noticed in a lot of nonprofit culture or community building is there's too much talking at someone and kind of treating it like corporate marketing, where it can feel manipulative, or like, "Oh,
mhm,
yeah, I see your Jedi mind tricks you're trying to pull on me with your little marketing jargon and lingo." But I think particularly in the nonprofit, in community service, it really has to be sincere. So if you're asking for someone's time, if you're asking for someone's money, if you're asking for their vote on a measure that helps your cause, if you're asking them to be a good ambassador for your mission, all of that has to be based on trust and this sense that we are in this together, and we are equals. And it's not just, I'm going to extract this from you, because the rest of society just wants to extract and
mhm,
exploit.
mhm,
So we have to be really, really careful, especially with volunteer and donor engagement, that this is a sincere relationship, whether it's for 5 hours at a drop-in, corporate group event, or whether it's for 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years, 5 decades of
mhm.
someone being aligned with your cause and committed to the work with you.
So I love that you brought up having listening sessions and just being able to listen and have that conversation, because I have been a part of groups or task force or different meetings where we're the goal is to work collectively, but it's not necessarily happening in the sense of like multiple organizations with their different agendas, just trying to get that across in these meetings. So let's talk a little bit more about the listening sessions, and who would you recommend? What organizations would you say are best positioned to host listening sessions? Like, when do you know this is best for my organization to be the host of this, and how do I become a neutral party without necessarily, yes, achieving the overall mission and overall goal, but not necessarily just pushing our strategic plan and trying to get everyone just to work hours, but working more collectively. um
Yeah,
mhm.
that's the hardest part, and that's where you run into the minefield with bare feet, is getting leadership of agencies, so boards and executive leaderships, to recognize that cooperation and collaboration is, especially these days, going to be much more successful than competition. So there's this
Mhm,
feeling of, we're gonna poach donors from someone. We're gonna take away their volunteers, or there are volunteers or our donors. And we
mhm,
actually need to completely flip that script and say, the classic "a rising tide raises all boats," but this kind of cooperative listening session, and to your point, kind of staying emotionally neutral, because I've hosted listening sessions with nonprofits and with government agencies, and
mhm,
especially with open meetings with government agencies. People have a lot to say, and you don't
mhm,
always want to hear what they have to say, but some of it can be valuable. So I think that skill is that leadership embracing the idea of, sharing information seamlessly. And if you have a good idea, steal it shamelessly. If something's
Mhm,
working in a program design, don't keep it to yourself. Try to get that information out there. And that
mhm,
was my motivation in starting the YouTube channel, is having and you with these live things,
mhm,
is there is
mhm,
open, free information for
mhm,
you to have whenever you want and dip into it as you need it. But usually the barriers are egos, or be feeling territorial about organizations, and this is my section of the community and your silos over there. You really have to change that attitude at the highest levels, and a good listening session can do that. You can change hearts and minds by getting people onto into a real conversation and hearing, this is what makes me feel unwelcome as a volunteer. This is what I get frustrated with as a donor. Um, why should I vote for that funding, county funding measure that helps, your resources grow? Like, well, what are you doing for me? I see you doing stuff for people over there, but like, what, how, why would I care? And so
mhm,
finding out people's why they would or would not support your agency, and then really focusing your energy on the people who not we usually focus our energy kind of singing to the choir, and it's like, oh, this is our same circle of supporters, and we go to them over and over again. But you really want as wide and diverse of an audience as possible to hear about your mission, your message, your cause, and communicate that in a way that people can either resonate with it as they get awareness of the work you're doing, because usually people just aren't aware that there are donor
mhm,
opportunities, volunteer opportunities, your agency's doing this work, they just don't know. But also that people can self-select out of that if that's not for them. And we as agencies and as program managers or volunteer community engagement professionals, we spend too much time chasing the people who will never like us. Also dating
mhm.
advice. Don't chase the people who are
Right,
just
you're
not
right.
that into you. They have other interests, they have other priorities, that's
Yep,
fine.
yep,
But there's that balance in having community listening sessions, virtually or in person. I've done a lot of both, where you really are transparent and honest about, these are our values as an agency, this is how we work, this is the work we're doing, this is why we think it's important. And when people have that understanding, then they go, oh, I didn't realize I see, conserving natural spaces does help mitigate climate change impacts. I didn't made that
mhm,
connection before. So there's some education that happens, but you also can hear from the community and see where your agency can help more or fill in the gaps, or where you're, quite frankly, having an epic fail. And
mhm,
the listening sessions I've had, you hear uncomfortable things, and it's pretty easy to sort out, like, who's just the complainer or the heckler who doesn't really have anything of value, versus people to say, and they just want to their 3 minutes of attention at the board meeting. That's fine,
mhm,
everyone gets their say, but you can actually glean some real wisdom. And we did a very specific outreach and study with an agency I was with from 2010 to 2019, called the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, where we realized, which is so common, this is in San Jose, Santa Clara County, that there's, in conservation especially, there's very, white savior colonialism attitudes that aren't always welcoming to other audiences, and their specific jargon, like, well, we're going to, clear invasive species from this watershed area. It's like, oh, it's a creek cleanup, can you just use plain language? And we realized, in reaching out specifically to Vietnamese communities and Spanish speaking communities and Chinese dialect communities, that, not only did we already have volunteers who spoke those languages and staff members who did, that people hearing from their own community is essential. So the first round of research and community outreach I tried to do was, uniformed rangers knocking on people's doors in neighborhoods where there had been a lot of, government and police violence, and like no one wants to open their door to someone with a
mhm,
badge knocking on their
mhm,
door. But having local community centers and libraries host open houses where, we have food, we have games for kids to play while we have, deeper conversations with the grown-ups. There's educational animals. So we made it a kind of a fun community event and a really easy, low pressure way to have as much conversation and get as much detail about what the agency wanted to do and how we wanted to change our programs and our community building. And that was much more effective than spamming people with flyers or
Mhm.
emails and things. Is you know having ambassadors and allies within these new communities, creating close relationships and trust with those folks and being genuine about it. Again, not like exploiting or extracting, and
Mhm.
then having them reach out to their in their language with
Mhm.
their cultural norms and backgrounds that can be really different from any assumptions that the board and the agency are making. And we found that within a couple of years, there was a huge shift. Our board looked different, our staff looked different, our
Mhm.
volunteer pool started to genuinely reflect the really rich diversity of backgrounds in the Santa Clara Valley and San Jose itself.
Wow. I love that. And often, like, especially when starting a new initiative that may not be in the community that your organization typically
Right.
is in, it is crucial to be able to engage people from that community, get their buy-in. And I love what you shared about them becoming ambassadors to help, us collectively work together to make that impact, based off of what your organization goals are. So, what role would you say volunteers play in community building? And I know there's so many different. That's probably a broad question.
Okay, I'll
But
keep it
I'll try.
economical. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, volunteers are, and this is something else that I teach or talk about on my channel. Is it's up
Mhm,
to anyone who's a leader of volunteers to really educate up. You have to kind of manage up and have your leadership and your board of your organization. If you're not on the leadership team, a lot of people in that role are kind of mid management. They need to understand that the value of volunteers is beyond whatever the average per hour estimate is
mhm,
for grant writing from independent sector. They have an average hourly wage. Volunteers are typically the largest amount of personnel in a department. So someone who's running that program, you have the most headcount of anyone in your agency, most likely.
mhm,
And the volunteers are really, that's the most public facing and best advertisement you have. And those are automatically the best ambassadors you have for your cause, for your mission, for your message. So something that's a great practice for any nonprofit or government agency working with volunteers is have two or three message points about the mission or the elevator pitch. Just, what are two or three things that everyone knows to say or can convey to other members of the public in conversation about your organization? How to be a volunteer, how to be a donor, what the mission is, and what kind of impact, positive impact it's having on the community. So if you just have three or four messaging points that everybody learns and knows,
mhm,
and if they don't know how to have a deeper conversation about the work, they're like, call so and so and
mhm,
direct them to the leader of volunteers or the director of development, whoever. That's a really, really crucial tool to community building, because over and over again, research has proven that whatever fancy software or recruitment platforms exist, and I've worked with the leaders of those companies a lot in the last 20 years, the best recruitment for volunteers and donors is still word of mouth. It's
mhm,
still trust and personal relationships and people having a good experience with your agency. So if there's trouble with recruiting volunteers or donors, that's a bigger issue that you need to look at within the agency. Are they having a bad experience? Do they feel unwelcome? Are they running into biases and bigotry when they try to interact with staff and other volunteers? So volunteers are really the foundation of the community building and the relationship building between any organization and the rest of the community. It all comes down to the volunteers because they're the ones doing the day to day work and then going back out to their families and their friends and any other volunteer work they do with other agencies and communicating like, yep, it's really great to work with a humane society, or like, ooh, that food bank experience was, I'm never going back there. That's the PR that you get, is people having a good or bad experience working with your agency, and no amount of spin can change that bad impression, and or create a false good impression if you can't back it up once people are there with treating them well and creating a welcoming and supported environment for folks.
Thank you for that. So you talked about how important volunteers and I love that you share that, volunteer is the volunteer manager pretty much have the largest access to personnel
Yeah.
within their organization, which is a really, really good point. So what about now, I love to always think about our smaller nonprofits where the
Hmm.
personnel is very small and they may not necessarily have a volunteer manager. Um, how can they tap into being able to build their volunteer program with limited staff? Like, what would you say, like the basic, at least at the very basic, do these things, or here's some tips around this so that you could get to the place where you are maybe doing some community building because you have some volunteers that's, a part of your organization. What's some tips you have there?
I think some easy tips around that are, because that's super common. There's sometimes just like one executive director that has to do everything, or
Mm-hmm.
there's three or four, part-time paid staff, and they're probably underpaid trying to do everything. The thing is that when you are if you're looking for more support from volunteers, the thing to remember is that volunteer isn't a job description, it's a pay description. So, whether your teammates, the people that you're trying to recruit and attract, whether they're paid or unpaid, full time or part time, they are professional people doing a job. And they're doing a job for a certain amount of time with you, whether that's packing groceries, which takes skill. If we're started with a food bank, so that takes skill,
Mm-hmm.
or doing, IT and graphic design. So volunteers can do anything. And when you are very specific in the job title and the duties and the commitment, and then also what does the agency do to support that role and that person,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just, hey, everybody show up and do this because it's good to do. It's like, well, again, what's that relationship look like? So, kind of setting and meeting expectations in recruitment is key, and getting away from the attitude of, oh, volunteers are free, they don't cost us any money. They don't need any resources. We don't need to pay someone to run the department. You're like, yeah, you probably do. Volunteers aren't free, but they have an incredible return on investment. And I'll share one
Mm-hmm.
example with a recent client that was a zoo in California, where we did calculations and realized that for every dollar they spend on volunteer services and resources, they get about $9 back in value as work, as donations, as community engagement, as relationship building, community building. And there's genuine algorithms and calculators that can help organizations figure that out. They can get in touch with me to get copies of those. It's all
Mm-hmm.
free. It's all free resources. And that also, I think, ties into the earlier question we sort of answered about, how do you know you can host? So
Mm-hmm.
if you have pretty strong capacity and you feel like you have pretty strong relationships and a good volunteer and donor program, if you feel like, okay, we're pretty solid in our community building and community engagement, we can always do better. That's a sign of an organization that's ready to host. It's going to be a lot harder for a smaller, one person band to
Mm-hmm.
do that, just because you have to recognize when you have the bandwidth. So most of the time, it's been a kind of a medium-sized organization that's done best, because really large ones often, like, the executives are so, if a big national or regional organization, sometimes the executives are so detached from the day-to-day workings, especially volunteers, it may not ever occur to them, or they're just so busy being CEOs of this giant national thing that they can barely think about the impact of community building or volunteers. So if you're in kind of a medium-sized organization and You already have a pretty good foundation of volunteer engagement, donor engagement. That's probably someone who's good to get with a listening session or set them up. Here in San Francisco, the Exploratorium, which is a fairly well-known museum, they pioneered a ton of great listening sessions, partnering with the city of San Francisco for our thing we have called Sunday Streets, where we shut
Mhm,
down certain blocks and we have neighborhood parties. And for years, it was just kind of a fun neighborhood party, and vendors come out and pop up tents, and
mhm,
you're safe. The kids can walk in the streets because there's no cars around for a few blocks. But they started the Exploratorium in the city started to have listening sessions, literally just sitting in circles and passing a mic around, some facilitation, so it wasn't completely, free
mhm,
for all. But that was really good information about how the city's running Sunday streets, how the Exploratorium was, changing some of its programs, changing what it's offering. And other in the last few years, other nonprofits, especially in the pandemic, started to copy that model because
mhm.
no one was precious about it. It was like, hey, we're structuring these listening sessions during this big fun community event. That's the perfect place to do that. And the Exploratorium isn't like, it's not the California Academy of Sciences, and that's this big giant museum. Like they're fairly well known, but they just have one location and they have, some they're good at, and that helped create this really fantastic model of community feedback that automatically starts to build trust, the sense that we are in this together, and that again is the foundation of any kind of community engagement or community building.
Love it. So anything else around community building that we did not cover that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think the other kind of foundational idea that I talk about a lot is always thinking about the three C's, not just with
Mhm,
volunteers, but with any relationship, which is thinking about everyone's their comfort, their convenience, and their connection to the cause. So if you're communicating your mission and whomever you're recruiting for any kind of outreach, if you also communicate to people that you are very interested in their comfort, their convenience, and their connection, and you're able to offer flexibility of the listening sessions, we had several of them. Here in San Francisco, it was specific to Sunday streets, but that's a pretty big crowd. When I was working, setting those up for the Open Space Authority, we had, once a week for 6 weeks in a row in different neighborhoods with different language and cultural centers and libraries and public spaces. So having some flexibility of ways for people to support the organization is key, and having everyone understand that, once people know that you are interested in and thinking about their comfort, their convenience, and their connection in working with your agency, that helps people realize that, oh, this is a safe place to commit my time. I will commit to this because I can tell this is going to be a sincere relationship. It's not always going to be perfect puppies, rainbows, unicorns, but at least we know
mhm.
that we can have honest communication. We can set and meet expectations for each other as individuals and as agencies, organizations, different community groups. I think thinking about the three C's is really, really key to building on that. And we don't hear that a lot. We don't get that someone's thinking about our comfort and convenience connection like in real life, especially the last few years.
Mhm.
So I think just letting people know, and even just saying those words, we're interested in your comfort, your convenience, and your connection with these roles or as a donor, like people go, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's pretty cool. And so I've never seen someone go, "Oh, don't worry about that." It's like they're always like, "Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
Mhm.
Yeah, let's engage." And that's again, it starts to build up that very sincere trust and sense of togetherness, which is crucial to that connection piece.
I love the way you sum that up. And while you're talking, I'm just thinking about my own nonprofit organization and which, for years was volunteer led. And it's still right now. Majority of the team is our volunteers, and a lot of the volunteers they've been around for years. And I would get that question, well, how do you retain, or how do you all, like, keep volunteers coming back and you know you know staying with you so long in that capacity. And you summing that up, I'm like, there it is right there. I was like, that's all I had to say. It's comfort, convenience, and connection. Being able to, when they come in, connected, making sure that they're in a space, in a role that they feel comfortable with. And there was times we had to even change
Yep.
roles when they found that, okay, this does not work
Not
anymore.
the right
Okay,
fit.
cool.
Yep.
Yeah, let's switch teams. We're not even going to try to make it fit. Let's go to, so working with their comfort. And then when it comes to convenience, making working with being very flexible with their schedules,
Mhm.
not necessarily, we before the pandemic, we've done a lot of things online because of the volunteers. If they couldn't make the in person, that's okay. We can get a lot accomplished online. So making it convenient for them, and then the connection is like the relationships that we build amongst the team. It's like an entire atmosphere of us working together, connecting with each other. The volunteers feeling a sense of belonging, like this is the place where I want to invest my time. And I just love that. Just while you were talking, I'm like, that's it right there. Like I'll go the long route to explain it, but that's it. That's it's just it's just
Comfort,
the
the
three C's.
three C's of, a happy team or happy
Yeah.
volunteers, comfort, convenience, connection. And there's other ways, under each one to think about comfort is, task, training,
Mhm.
literally the temperature, physically and emotionally. Are you inside? Are you
Mhm.
outside? Is the air conditioning
Mhm.
not work in a heat wave? And
Mhm.
then just
Mhm.
because I worked in conservation, I added, toilet and tummy because a lot of times we had groups outside where it's like, how are
Uh-huh.
we going to eat? And then what happens after?
Oh, good
And so
point.
kind of
Yeah.
basic comforts, but it goes
Mhm.
much deeper than that. And you think about conveniences, time, transportation, and technology are kind of the
Mhm.
two. And this makes me remember things easier when I have a
Yeah.
couple keywords. And
Yeah.
then again, connection is trust and together. And you could even add
Yep.
transparency, honest
Yep.
communication to connection. And exactly what just happened when you and I are talking about it, where you light up and go, oh, I'm already doing those things. When I have
Right.
these conversations with fairly successful organizations where, yeah, they might need a little updating, or I help them, update technology or just like tiny little tweaks here and there, but they're doing pretty well. People who are doing this well recognize they're already thinking about comfort, convenience, connection. They
Mhm.
just haven't thought about it with just those three words. And other folks who are like, oh, we really fail at some of those, like, okay, here's
Mhm.
how you can get up to there. But to me, that's been just like, once that occurred to me like 7 years ago, working with a specific group of, like, I got to think about their comfort, convenience, connection, or they're not going to commit. And then
Mhm.
they did, once we had those conversations about, this is how what your day with your group is gonna look like, and here's how we take care of you, and here's what we expect from you. That's golden. That's
Love
really priceless.
I love that. So, before we conclude today's call, I want to, if you don't mind, just sharing a little bit about what you do, your services with
Mhm.
organizations. How do you support them? If you can share some of that information, and then how can they stay connected and get connected with you?
Sure. Well, my website's danalitwinconsulting.com, but you can also type in danalitwin.com, and that gets to contact me. And really, my consulting is around, I'm a specialist in volunteer engagement, community building, but I also have advised nonprofits on general strategies, planning, anything that really comes up. Sometimes I've done direct leadership coaching with executives or someone who's just been promoted to run volunteers and give them tips. And I have a lot of, again, my YouTube channel is Dana's Priceless Advice with leaders of volunteers. So if people just look up at Dana Litwin CVA on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm also on, because Twitter's a bit of a dumpster fire right now. I'm on Blue Sky and Spoutable.
Okay.
Um, and Instagram. But really, if you go to YouTube and just look up Dana's Priceless Advice with Leaders of Volunteers, you'll find hundreds and hundreds of videos. Some are longer interviews with other experts around the world, and the topics and the keywords are pretty easy to find. And again, weekly Tuesday tips. I just did a Tuesday tips this week, kind of relating to our American Labor Day holiday, about the importance of workforce resilience and wellness, and taking care of your
Mm,
well-being with what I call do. You do some stuff and then you just be, and you're quiet and you're restorative, and
mm.
then you do it and then you just be, instead of do, which is what what our
I
culture
love that.
expects. So doobie doobie do some stuff
Yep,
and then just be, and then do some
yep.
stuff and then just
I
be.
love that.
Yeah, so, folks can tune into those videos, and also I love just featuring people who are doing this work. It doesn't have to be like, "You're a world famous, person from this agency." It's like, I talk to regular people who are doing the work every day, and I am very curious about learning from each other all of the time. Again, in that mutual conversation, we're talking with each other, no one's talking at you.
Mhm,
And we're learning from each other all the time. So I think if folks can stay curious and cultivate that idea of always be learning, especially always be learning from each other throughout the agency and the community, that's really what kind of keeps my spark going, and I think really helps inspire other people in this work, especially if you feel down or under resourced or overworked. Sometimes it just takes knowing that there is a community of people in nonprofit,
mhm,
leaders of volunteers, donor management folks that are there for each other. And that can look like a professional association, in the States, a live association of leaders of volunteer engagement, or that can look like just your local group of friends where you just, hang out and vent with each other.
mhm.
But I think being there for each other and creating that community and modeling that, that's where you see real success.
Awesome, thank you. Doobie doobie doo. I love
Doobie doobie
it.
doo, doobie doobie
Yeah,
doo.
yeah,
You can
yeah,
sing it, you can say it, you can live it.
yeah. I love that. Awesome. It's always a pleasure having you on. I would love it. I'll share the information with you for you to come back on in the future. And of course, I know you mentioned looking for guests. I would love, if to talk about volunteers with you as well. So,
Yeah.
um,
Have each
yeah.
other on our shows. We'll
Yep.
both,
Mhm.
podcast each other, show,
Right. Yep.
TV shows. I love it. Absolutely.
Yes,
Absolutely.
let's do it. So thank you once again for joining us, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And that concludes today's Nonprofit Enthusiast Live, and we will see you next Thursday. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Lashina. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.